you had. Can you tell about that, about this process, moving from theater to cinema?
Yes, I found I had a very slow start as a screenwriter. I had a very fast start as a theatre writer. I wrote a play when I was 18, and it got on in the theatre in London, so I was rocket propelled at the beginning.
You were the youngest playwright that had his play in West End.
Yes, I was. What happened that year when the play was on was that I sold the film rights of the play, and I was hired to write the screenplay. And I had never read a screenplay.
Christopher, we apologize, we can hardly hear you.
Can you not hear me? Is that better?
Oh, I think, yeah.
Thank you very much. And please, if I speak too quietly or too quickly, shout like that. It's good.
We appreciate that.
Yes, we appreciate it. So the first time I was hired to write a screenplay, I had never read a screenplay. I made a very stupid assumption, which was that writing screenplays was bound to be easier than writing stage plays. Because in a stage play, you're confined to one space, you have to get people on and off the stage, it's technically quite complicated. I thought in a film, you can go from Odessa to Hong Kong in 1 second. And so it must be easier. Of course, the more freedom you have, the more liberty you have, the more difficult it is. So it's not easier, it's more difficult. And when I came to write my first screenplay, I hadn't understood this. The first thing I did, because I'd never read a screenplay before, was I bought 5 screenplays by Harold Pinter, which had been adapted from 5 different novels. And I bought the novels. And that was my education, really. I read the novels, and then I read what Harold Pinter had made of them, and how he had translated them into film. And that was the first important lesson that I had. But unfortunately, for the first, well, more than 10 years of screenwriting, I really didn't write anything that was very good. There were so many things I didn't understand, and so many complexities that I hadn't worked out how to solve.
But that's the crucial problem. Can you tell us about, the problem number one? You just said that, yeah, it's very different from, the stage plays, but so what did you figure out? What did you figure out while trying to make a good screenplay?
Well, I didn't really figure out a great deal by myself. I started to work with very good directors. I had a few weeks with the great director Joseph Mankiewicz, but the film was cancelled before we actually got writing. But I began to feel that there was something more than I had understood. And then I was hired at the end of the 70s by the director Fred Zinnemann.
That is the one, The High Noon and From Here to Eternity.
That's right, and a number of very successful Hollywood films. Man for All Seasons, it was one of the last films that he had most recently done, and a film called Julia. So I went to work with him, and the subject he chose was a very little known fact, that after the end of the Second World War, I guess you probably know better about it than I did at the time, a lot of Russian soldiers, particularly Cossacks, who had fought on the German side during the war, were taken prisoner, and they were sent back. They were sent back to Russia, and most of them were executed. And so this meant that 6 weeks after the end of the Second World War, people were being thrown into cattle trucks and sent off to be executed, which was not really what the war was about, I guess. But and it had to be organised by British soldiers. So the method that we chose was to take. First of all, it was a big story. There were more than 2 million people who suffered in this way. So Fred said, you have to choose one incident, one day. So we chose a day in a place called Lienz in Austria, where 15,000 people were. First of all, the officers were separated from the men, and they were then the men were put into the trains and sent back, and the officers were marched across the bridge at a place called Ludenburg, where they were immediately shot on the other side. So what we did was we just chose that one incident, and we travelled around the world. We went to America, we went to Germany, we went to Scotland, and found people who had undergone this, who had been there on the day, and we tape recorded all their evidence. In the end, we had about 50 hours of tape recorded interviews. And finally, in Scotland, on a big golf course called Carnoustie, which is a famous golf course, they brought in a woman who was from Odessa. And she, at the age of 14, she and her friend had been in school in Odessa, and her whole class had been taken from Odessa and taken to Auschwitz, where they were all subjected to medical experiments by the famous Dr. Mengele. Afterwards, because they were not Jewish, afterwards they were not killed. They were put into labor forces, and then they were moved. She, in fact, had been moved to Dachau, and she and her friend had escaped at the very end of the war, and all they wanted was to get back to Odessa and to get back to their families. So they came.